Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the Daily Hindu News Analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 3 important articles that are relevant for the mains and 4 small articles that are important for the prelims examination. So before we take up the analysis, we have a very important announcement. Starting from tomorrow, a free current affairs crash course is going to start right here on our YouTube channel as part of Conquer Prelims 2024. 4 months ago, when we started Unacademy IAS English, we made a promise that this would be a one-stop destination for your IAS preparation needs. And today, we promise to deliver because we have seen many comments from students asking for a revision crash course so that they can revise the current affairs of the last 1.5 years. As prelims is approaching, we know that many students find it difficult to revise the current affairs from different subjects. So to solve these problems for you and to provide an easy solution to revise the current affairs, we are launching Conquer Prelims 2024. The static part has already started on the app, but the current affairs crash course is beginning from tomorrow right here on our YouTube channel. So essentially, throughout the month of May, on all the 31 days, there will be 31 live classes from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. You just have to spare 90 minutes of your day throughout the month of May. Just give us your 90 minutes and we promise that we will cover more than 500 to 600 important topics through MCQ-based discussion. It's the best way to not just revise current affairs but also to prepare for the upcoming prelims examination. So do attend these sessions live. Don't think you can watch the recorded sessions later. You'll simply end up procrastinating. So do watch the session live, and the best part is we will ensure that it would be an interactive session. You can not only attempt the poll live, but you also get an opportunity at the end to engage with the faculty and raise some doubts and questions. And our expert teachers will be there to guide you throughout the period of the crash course. So I've added the schedule in the PPT itself. Please download the PPT, which is the link for which is available in the description box below. Also, you can go to our Telegram page or the community section where the entire schedule has been updated. So we are covering all the important subjects: polity, environment ecology, science and technology, economy, international relations, and even other important areas like places in news, art and culture, government schemes, and as well as reports and indices. So do let us know what you think about this initiative, and without fail, attend all the 31 classes. It is just 90 minutes of your time for 1 month. We promise that this would be the easiest way, the most effective way to revise the current affairs of last 1.5 years. Then apart from that, we have the static phase of the crash course, which is continuing on the Unacademy app, where we are discussing the most important static topics needed for the upcoming prelims. So today, Shyam sir will be taking up the next session on Indian economy at 6 p.m. and the link for this session will be provided in our Telegram channel. Just join our Telegram channel and the link will be shared right before the session goes live. And also, as part of the free special classes that we were conducting last week, today and tomorrow, I will be taking up the last 2 classes under How Geography Defines Geopolitics. Today, join me live at 1 p.m. where we discuss the geography of the Europe and Americas region, and let's understand how it defines the geopolitics of these regions and countries present over here. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. we will talk about the polar areas and outer space and understand how geography is influencing the geopolitics of the global commons. The links for these sessions can also be found in the video description. So with this, let's start with today's discussion by looking at this important article from page number 8. This article is related to environment and ecology. It is specifically dealing with a recent amendment that was done to the Forest Conservation Act. So let's understand what the article is dealing with, what's the context here, and then we'll go deep into the topic and understand all the key points related to this issue which is being brought up here by this article. The article is mainly focused on a category of forest known as unclassed forests. I'm sure you would have heard about reserved forests, protected forests, notified forests. So there is a category of forests called unclassed forests. So the focus of the article is entirely on this category of forests, which is called unclassed forests. So first let's understand why is it in news. Let's set the context and then I'll explain what are unclassed forests. See, recently the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 was amended by the Modi government. The Parliament passed the amendment bill and the Forest Conservation Amendment Act has already come into force. Now, when this bill was introduced in the Parliament, there was a lot of controversy regarding this amendment bill. There was a lot of criticism by environmental activists, environmental organizations against the proposed amendments. It was argued that these amendments would enable deforestation in the country. It would essentially allow the government to divert forest land for non-forest purposes. So as a result, there were petitions filed at the Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of the Amendment Act. Now, I hope you guys remember that we have already covered this topic in detail. The Forest Conservation Amendment Act, we have discussed this repeatedly in the last few months. But here, the article is focused on a specific issue related to unclassed forests and how they are treated under the Amendment Act. So when petitions were filed at the Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of the Amendment Act, the Supreme Court, which was looking into the question of unclassed forests, it directed the central and state governments to bring out reports and provide data regarding unclassed forests in the country. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and the state governments, they were directed by the Supreme Court to bring out all the data concerning unclassed forests in India. So accordingly, state governments were supposed to set up state expert committees comprising of top forest officials, revenue officials, and as well as few environmental experts. These expert committees at the state level, their task was to identify the unclassed forests in the state and present a report and bring the data into the public domain. So after some delay, state expert committees, some of them have submitted the reports and the center has uploaded these reports and data on its website. So this was the recent development. Just few days ago, as per the Supreme Court's directive, state expert committee reports have been prepared by few states and Environment Ministry at the center has uploaded this data on its website. So now, let us understand why unclassed forests are so important. What is the controversy related to the Forest Conservation Amendment Act? And what is the concern here regarding the diversion of unclassed forests? Why is the concern coming up? So to understand this, first you should know the definition of unclassed forests. How do you define it, or how is it identified under the law? How is it different from other categories of forests? See, when it comes to forest land could be owned by the government. It could be owned by indigenous communities or few individuals of forest dwelling tribes, or some forest land could be private owned as well. When you just look at ownership as to who could own the forest land, this would be the ownership. Some forest land would be government owned. Let's say, for example, railways, Indian Railways has large tracts of land under its ownership and some of it could be under forest cover. There could be private land, privately owned land, which is part of the forest cover. There could be community owned land or individual owned land, which could be also having forest cover. So with regard to ownership, we can classify forests into these categories. With regard to the degree of protection provided by law, we can classify forests into reserved forests, protected forests. Essentially, these are notified by the government. The government notifies certain key habitats which requires additional protection, and they are set up as reserved forests and protected forests. Apart from this, there could be other forest lands which may have not been classified or notified. They are not classified based on ownership. They are not notified. They are unnotified forest patches. This is exactly what you mean by unclassed forests, meaning they are not placed under any classification. It's neither reserved nor protected forests, right? It may be belonging to government entities or communities or individuals or private institutions. But the thing here is, it is not classified as reserved, protected or notified. It has no such classification. That is why these patches of forest, they are called unclassed forests. The ownership could be anything. It could be government owned, it could be community owned or individual owned, or it could be private owned forest land. But it has not been classified. It's not been notified by the concerned government. So such a patch of forest land is technically called unclassed forests. Now, if you look at the Forest Survey of India's report on the state of forests in India, right? India has an extensive forest cover touching almost 23 to 24%. But the eventual goal is to ensure that we have at least 33% forest cover in the plains and 66% forest cover in the hills, according to the National Forest Policy of 1988. Under the National Forest Policy, a target was set for the forest cover in India, which is at around 33% for plain areas, 66% in the hills. Currently, our forest cover is somewhere in the range of 23 to 24%, as per the reports of Forest Survey of India. Now, most of these reports, they just look at the notified forest land. They often take into account the notified forest land, which includes reserved and protected forests. In many cases, unclassed forests are not considered as forest cover. They don't have any kind of protection. In fact, in many places, unclassed forests might have already been diverted for commercial usage and non-forest usage. So this leads to loss of biodiversity. This leads to environmental harm. So that is why it is very important to look after the unclassed forests as well and focus on their conservation. So when it comes to the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, under this law, definition of forest was always a cause for concern. This law actually had a colonial origin, right? Based on the colonial definition, a very limited definition had been given for forest land. It was the Supreme Court of India which really widened the definition of forests in the year 1996 through the Godavarman case. This was a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court in 1996. In the Godavarman case in the year 1996, the Supreme Court expanded the definition of forests. Until then, it was a very narrow, limited definition given by the law, given by the Forest Conservation Act. So only those notified forest land was treated as forest cover and only they enjoyed protection in the country. But in the Godavarman case of 1996, the Supreme Court almost universalized the definition of forests. The Supreme Court said that forest would mean the dictionary meaning of forests, irrespective of who owns it, irrespective of what is its classification. Any patch of land which has forests, which has a dense tree cover, will be treated as forest under the provisions of Forest Conservation Act. The Supreme Court extended the dictionary meaning of forests to Forest Conservation Act. So this widened the scope of forest conservation and it expanded the definition of forests in India. Doesn't matter whether it's owned by the government or private entities or communities. Doesn't matter whether it is classified or unclassified. Any piece of land which depicts the dictionary meaning of forests, right, would be treated as forests under the law. So this was a landmark verdict which was seen as pro-environment, pro-forest conservation. But now there is a concern that the government is trying to dilute the Godavarman ruling. This was the big concern regarding the Forest Conservation Amendment Act that was enacted last year in the Parliament. Critics have pointed out that the central government is making an attempt through the Amendment Act to dilute the Godavarman verdict, to restrict the definition of forest land and especially to divert unclassed forests for non-forest purposes. Now, if you look at the Amendment Act, it clearly states that in case of unclassed forests which are not classified, central government will reserve the right to provide approval for projects. Let's say there is an important public project going on or a private project which has been taken up. If the project proponent who has proposed the project, who is executing the project, if they approach the central government, which would be the Environment Ministry, and submit a request for diverting unclassed forest land for non-forest purposes, the central government has given itself the right to provide the approval. The government's argument is that it is necessary to promote infrastructure creation, to promote economic growth, because there is a need to balance the need for environment conservation with the need to promote economic growth, because sometimes both can be contradictory. So government has a valid point that sometimes environmental laws, if they are very stringent, it could hamper growth, it could hamper infrastructure creation in the country. So government says that this is a necessary dilution which is well within the norms, that government will look at each case on an individual case-to-case basis, and depending on the importance of a project, government can grant approval to divert unclassed forests towards the economic projects which can be used by both public and private entities. So here, environmental activists raise a concern. The concern is that if government is giving itself the power to divert unclassed forest land for non-forest uses, then this could lead to large-scale deforestation. Tomorrow, in the name of national interest, in the name of fulfilling the larger economic agenda, government could divert most of the unclassed forests towards commercial economic activities and towards infrastructure projects and strategic projects. For example, if you look at the amendment, near the border areas where India shares international borders, up to 100 kilometers, government has given itself the right to divert forest land for non-forest usage on the grounds of strategic reasons, security reasons. Of course, the government has a valid point, but the fear amongst environmental activists is that this blatant power could lead to large-scale deforestation. It could lead to destruction of forest cover. And especially since unclassed forests don't have any kind of protection, they're not even classified, not even notified, project proponents can just approach the government, get the approvals and clear the forest land. Or the clearance might have already happened. Many years ago, there might be illegal encroachment. Maybe private builders, they have encroached on forest area which was unclassed, right? They would have already deforested the area, converted it into commercial properties. They're supposed to face legal action for that. But now that they can approach the government and get a reprieve here, it could be very well converted for non-forest usage, and thus it would legitimize the illegal encroachment of forest land as well. So these serious concerns have been expressed, and that is why petitioners approached the Supreme Court, challenging the constitutionality of the Amendment Act. The Supreme Court has given few directives, and one important directive is to bring out reliable data on unclassed forests in India. So accordingly, state expert committees were supposed to be set up at the state level, and these expert committees were supposed to give their reports, which the Environment Ministry was supposed to bring out in the public domain. So now, according to the article, 23 states and union territories have submitted the report, but only 17 of them have followed the directives of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had issued a few directives regarding the composition of these committees, regarding the mandate of these committees, but only 17 states and union territories have followed the directives of the Supreme Court out of the 23 which have submitted the report. So what about the rest? There are 7 states and union territories which didn't even bother constituting the state expert committee. So you can understand how negligent it must be on the part of the state governments and also on the center to not even establish the state expert committee to look into the extent of unclassed forests in their state. So 7 states and UTs have not even constituted a state expert committee. And those who have submitted the report, right, there are problems with the data that they have provided. The data is not sufficient. They have done an ad hoc job. They've relied on existing records. They have not conducted any ground level surveys. They have not used any scientific tools, any scientific assessment. Using historical records, they have simply filled up the report and submitted the report to the government, to the central government, and it has published the report on the website. So this is a serious concern. They have not marked out the exact extent and location of these unclassed forests. They have only given broad numbers at the state level. In terms of area, they have said that this could be the extent of unclassed forests in our state. Such information, such vague, unverifiable information is pretty much useless when it comes to policy making and decision making. They have not given the location, the geographical location of these unclassed forests. They have not spelled out the exact extent of these unclassed forests in their respective states. So using such data, you can't really protect these category of forests called unclassed forests. So that is the concern being expressed here by the article. See, the issue here was when the amendment bill was brought out in the parliament, there was a huge controversy. Opposition parties opposed the amendment bill, and a joint parliamentary committee was set up, and the bill was referred to the joint parliamentary committee for further review. So when Environment Ministry was questioned by the JPC, when this parliamentary committee on environment raised questions about the question on unclassed forests, Environment Ministry informed the MPs that these state expert committees, they will bring us enough data, and we will only use this data to decide on diversion of unclassed forests. That was the justification that the central government had provided. But now these reports themselves are pretty much useless. They are not reliable. So back then, when the Amendment Act was passed through the parliament, it was based on the premise that state expert committees will provide the required data through these reports. But now if you look at the reports that have been brought out, it does not have any reliable data and information on unclassed forests. At least most of the states, they haven't done a complete honest job when it comes to identifying these unclassed forests. So tomorrow, if project proponents approach the center asking for approval to divert unclassed forests for non-forest usage, it might be approved in most cases because there is no reliable data. The government might say that legally we are correct, technically we are correct. We are relying on the state expert committee reports. Problem is the reports are flawed. The reports have not even properly identified where the unclassed forests are present. In fact, the writers even point out that there is a big mismatch in the data provided by the state expert committees and the data with the Forest Survey of India. The Forest Survey of India is the only institution in the country which conducts extensive surveys of forest land. It brings out the status of forest report. Right? So according to data with Forest Survey of India, the extent of unclassed forests in the country is much more than what the states are projecting. So this is the concern that the article is bringing up. So that's what we understand from this important column. So this could be a basis for a mains question. Right? UPSC might ask you about the controversy surrounding the Forest Conservation Amendment Act, the concerns surrounding it, and what could be the way forward. So now let's look at the next column on page number 9 related to economy. This article actually deals with a very interesting economic concept called the paradox of thrift, or also called paradox of savings. Let's understand this in detail. It's very relevant for the Indian economy as of now, and it's something which has always brought up a lot of curiosity, right, amongst academicians and students, because this is a very interesting concept. See, generally, when it comes to savings and investments, we all assume that if we start saving more, if we start investing more at an individual level, we have the assumption that at a national level, this would also translate into higher savings and investments. Correct? It's not just your assumption. Even the governments, even policy makers, many of them have the same assumption. The assumption is that if individuals start saving more out of their income, assumption is they're investing it somewhere. Right? Not everyone just keeps money under their bed or in lockers. They might be buying gold, they might be investing in different assets. So the assumption here is that more savings and investments at the household level, at the individual level, will automatically translate to national savings and investments. But however, according to the paradox of thrift, this assumption is wrong. In fact, the opposite happens, the exact opposite happens in an actual economy. On paper, you might assume, theoretically, that more savings by individuals will translate to more national savings, right? But this is not true. It's the exact opposite which actually happens in the real economy. Once we start saving more, keeping part of our income as savings and investments, if we start doing this on a large scale, right, you will notice that national savings and investments actually decline. The national economy takes a hit. Let's examine why. Let's understand why this happens. That's why it's called the paradox. It's a paradox of savings or paradox of thrift. You might think that you are saving money at an individual level. It is good at a household level, but at a national level, this could hurt the economy. And if your economy is hit, it will eventually hit the individuals as well. So that is the irony here. That is the paradox here. So let's understand how this happens, why it happens. Now imagine an individual is earning a certain income. Let's say this individual is earning 1,000 rupees per month. Just a hypothetical example. Now this individual starts focusing on savings. Let's say this person got married, so he or she, they have more commitments. They want to save for the family, for their children, etc. So they start saving more from their income. Let's say they were spending 500 rupees a month prior. Now they might try to bring down their spending. They might try to cut down expenditure, try to bring it down to, let's say, 400 rupees a month. Usually it was around 500 to 600 rupees. Now they are trying to reduce that as well so that they can save more. So essentially they end up saving 600 rupees a month. So cumulatively, in the long run, this is good for everyone, good for the family, right? The family is saving more per month. They've reduced their expenditure. So in a year, their savings will increase. They will invest them in certain assets, which eventually is good for the economy as well. We assume that national savings will go up, investments will go up. But in reality, it does not happen. What happens? Since the individual reduced the expenditure, the demand for consumption starts reducing. Consumption demand will start going down when all of us start saving on a large scale. Now imagine if everyone is doing the same. Imagine we are getting a decent income, we got appraisals, we got good hikes, right? And I want to save most of that money and I want to cut down my expenditure as well. That's what most of us do. That is the concept of thrift, right? You're very cautious about how you're spending your money. So you try to cut down your expenditure, try to increase your savings. Now, if this is done by almost every household, right, at a national level, if you look at this with a broader picture, you will notice that the demand will start dying down. Let's say this individual would go watch 5 movies in a month. Now they have brought it down to just 1 movie a month. So the consumption demand went down in that particular sector. Let's say people were buying a lot of consumer goods, FMCG products, or let's say more phones and cars and vehicles. If everyone starts going into a saving mindset, right, the savings might increase at the family level, at the individual household level, but at a national level, the consumption demand will drop, right? So this drop, it will scare the investors. The moment the consumption demand drops, the capitalists, they will start holding back their investments. They will assume that the economy is going into a downward cycle where there will be further reduction in consumption demand. And based on this assumption, investors will hold back the investments. And once they do that, it will create a vicious cycle. When investments are held up, job creation gets affected, right? If job creation is affected, people's salaries, their incomes could get affected, which will further push them into the cycle of savings, further reducing consumption demand, again reducing investments. This vicious cycle which could get triggered, right, is what we call as the paradox of savings. So at a national level, savings might actually be harmful, right, if this vicious cycle kicks into effect. So that is why the government intervenes. whenever there is this drop in consumption demand, the government steps in to revive the demand through various fiscal initiatives, through various monetary policy initiatives from the central bank. An attempt will be made to quickly correct the course and bring back consumption demand. So one way to bring consumption demand back on track is to provide more money in the hands of the people. Push them to spend more. See, this is a theory which is debated by all the top economists as well. In fact, this very paradox theory was popularized by John Maynard Keynes, the very popular British economist. In his book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, he explained this vicious cycle which could get triggered if everyone starts saving, and how it could affect the national economy, how it could bring down consumption demand. Right? In his 1936 book, John Maynard Keynes spoke about this concept, and he urged the governments and even investors to not fall for the trap. Investors should not assume that consumption demand is actually going down. It's only because people are saving more. It doesn't mean they don't have money. Right? So that is where investors need to be mindful, and they should continue with the investments. And the government especially should push the investors to continue with the investments and create the right incentives for both investors and as well as for the consumers. So consumers can keep up their expenditure while saving sufficiently, and it should push the investors as well to keep investing in the economy. So this theory was brought out by top economists even prior to Keynes, by William Foster, Waddell Catchings. They all spoke about the paradox of savings or the paradox of thrift. But the theory really became popular with the work of Keynes in 1936. So the solution here is that you need to push the consumers to spend. The demand should be sustained, right? For that, they should have adequate income in their hands. Along with meeting the required expenditure, there should be focus on savings, but you should push the consumers to increase the expenditure, and that will happen only when their incomes also go up. So solving this paradox is always a huge challenge, a dilemma for policymakers. Is that clear? So what is paradox of savings or paradox of thrift? It is the wrong assumption that savings at individual level will translate to more savings and investments for the national economy. Usually it does not happen, because as people start saving more, they reduce the expenditure, consumption demand goes down, and as demand drops, investments will also stop. The capitalists will get scared, they'll move away from investing. This will affect job creation, it will affect income again, and it will again affect expenditure. It will again affect consumer demand. So to break the vicious cycle, governments and central banks have to play a pivotal role and push the investors to keep investing. Give them incentives, give them certain support measures. Support the consumer as well. Ensure that you increase their income levels so they can increase the expenditure while focusing on saving. Right? The 1,000 rupee income, that should become 1,500, 1,800. So expenditure goes up to, let's say, 600, 700, plus the savings will also be another 600, 700 rupees. So that is an ideal situation. So if an economy falls into this trap, into this paradox, then it could drag down the economic growth. So supporters of this theory, those who support this concept, right, those who believe that this concept does exist, they believe in boosting consumer spending. They urge governments, these economists, they urge governments to push the consumers to spend more, to put more money in the hands of the people. They see this as the solution. As I told you in that example, if 1,000 rupee was the monthly income of that individual, right, the income should increase, let's say 2,500. So that expenditure, which previously maybe was 500 rupees, could increase to 700. Parallelly, savings will also happen, right? It will ensure that the individual family is saving enough while increasing expenditure in relation to the increasing income. So the proponents of the paradox of savings or paradox of thrift, they urge governments to ensure that consumers have more money to spend. That's the only way to boost consumer demand. Whereas there are critics as well. Not everyone agrees with paradox of savings or paradox of thrift. They criticize the theory. They say that this, again, is driven by inherent assumptions. Data from certain economies during various periods of time shows that when savings increased, it created a wider asset for the government, for investors. Because people don't just save in cash, right? You do something with the saving, you go and invest that. You increase your stock market investments, your mutual fund investments. You may invest in various bonds brought out by the government or the banks, right? You might purchase gold. So all these assets which are getting created eventually flows back into the economy. It will give more space for the government and the banking system and the investors to bring that back into the market. So critics, they dismiss the paradox of savings, paradox of thrift. They don't agree that savings are going waste, that savings will bring down consumer demand. They say that savings will actually create legitimate assets, tangible assets, which will further benefit the economy in the long run. They say that individual savings is very good in the long run, not just for the individual household, but for the country itself. All right? So there are two sides of the argument here, and this is something you need to be aware of, because even India does experience this. You might have seen how, for example, during the festive season, let's say Diwali is approaching, right, or Eid is approaching, immediately there is a spike in consumer demand. Why? Because people are spending more. They're ready to spend more because they're celebrating. But after the festive season, there is a downward cycle, right? People now, they know they've spent more during festivals. They bought clothes, they bought jewelry, right? They went on a splurging spree during festive season. Now they try to tone down the spending. So this leads to a drop, a temporary drop. It doesn't mean people don't have money. People will still have money. It's just that they're trying to increase their savings. This is what we often refer to as a business cycle, right? In a calendar year, in a fiscal year, there will be certain periods where businesses will hit peaks because there is a sudden spike in consumer demand. There will be certain months where demand drops and business cycle will also drop, right? So managing this spike and drop is a challenge. So understanding the paradox of thrift will help policymakers to come out with the right measures to ensure that consumer demand is sustained while boosting savings and investments. Now coming to the third article on page number 6. This column is related to the topic of healthcare in India. I'm sure all of you know that healthcare in India is quite expensive, particularly private healthcare, because most people don't rely on public healthcare given the poor infrastructure and the poor facilities and quality of treatment available in government hospitals. In India, reliance on private healthcare is massive, which also increases our out-of-pocket expenditure, meaning we are spending more from our own pockets for healthcare. So with this regard, there is a controversy which has broken out, a recent controversy regarding how healthcare expenditure has increased, primarily due to the profit-mindedness of private hospitals. As you know, private hospitals, they charge enormous sums of money for basic procedures, treatments, and surgeries. And the rates vary from hospital to hospital, city to city. Of course, price points will be different. It'll be dependent on many factors. But one concern here is that the excessive pricing of certain treatments, procedures, and surgeries, it could hurt the patients, it could hurt the common man, which essentially makes healthcare unaffordable for a large number of people in the country. So that is the focus of this article here. Recently, a PIL was filed at the Supreme Court. A public interest litigation was filed by a petitioner urging the Supreme Court to issue a direction to the central government to introduce a cap on the prices in hospitals, to regulate the rates for various treatments, surgeries, and procedures, and ensure that there is strict government regulation and implementation to cap the rates charged by private hospitals. So government has the power to do that. The government can regulate the rate structure in the hospitals under the Clinical Establishment Act. The Clinical Establishments Registration and Regulation Act of 2010, it empowers the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare to come out with a rate card specifying the maximum limit. Basically, it can set a cap, a maximum cap for different treatments, procedures, and surgeries, and ensure that private hospitals don't breach that cap. So here, we already have those regulations. The rate caps are already there, but problem is in enforcement. It's not being implemented, it's not being enforced. So many times private hospitals, they cross the limits set by the government, they charge these exorbitant prices, and many times it gives us the assumption, or it gives us a feeling that healthcare in India is truly unaffordable. And it is a reality as well, where only the rich can afford advanced tertiary healthcare, right? Whereas the poor and even the middle class might find it very difficult to access quality healthcare in the private sector. So that is why this petition was filed, asking for a Supreme Court direction to the government of India to strictly bring out these rate caps, these price limits, and enforce and implement them on the hospital sector in the country, on the healthcare sector in the country. So the writers are examining, is this a solution? Can we really make healthcare affordable just by capping the prices? That is the question the writer is asking, right? The writer says affordable healthcare cannot be achieved just by limiting the prices and regulating the prices. If that were to be the case, by now healthcare in India should have become affordable because we already regulate the prices. As I told you, under Clinical Establishments Act, the government can set price caps and price limits. It has already been set. Problem is in implementation. So just implementing these price caps alone will not make healthcare affordable. That is why the writer is calling for wider reforms in healthcare sector. You need more investments in public healthcare. Right now, government spending on healthcare is very less as a percentage of GDP, right? It's hardly around less than 2% of our GDP, which is one of the lowest amongst similar sized economies. India's public spending on healthcare is one amongst the lowest as a percentage of GDP. So there are a wide set of reforms needed in the healthcare sector to make healthcare accessible and affordable. Just setting a price cap alone will not solve the problem. That is the core argument being made by the writer. The writer is saying that data shows that more than half the total expenditure in India on healthcare is out-of-pocket expenditure. OOP stands for out-of-pocket expenditure. Essentially, out of the entire money being spent on healthcare in the country, more than 50% of it is coming from the pockets of the common man. People are paying for their own healthcare. Rest of it is coming from some government schemes, maybe like Ayushman Bharat, Janani Suraksha Yojana, etc., and some part of it from the insurance sector. So public and private funding of healthcare is less than 50%. More than 50% of healthcare expenditure is coming from our pockets, from the pocket of the people, the common man. So in India, out-of-pocket expenditure remains very high because there is a greater dependency on private healthcare. We don't trust the public healthcare institutions. The reason is there is a serious, genuine question about the quality of healthcare provided in the public sector. Maybe there are few good government hospitals, yes, but vast majority of them, especially at the primary healthcare centers, at the secondary healthcare centers, they may not have the right infrastructure, the right doctors, or even the right motivation to offer quality healthcare, right? So all these are problems which need to be addressed at a policy level. The government needs to shift its focus towards public funding of healthcare, increase public spending on healthcare, and regulate private healthcare. Just regulating private healthcare, setting price caps alone will not solve the problem. You might think that if you put a maximum price cap for every treatment, surgery, and procedure, automatically it will make healthcare affordable. It will not happen on the ground because those caps already exist. In certain cases, there are very strict price caps brought out by the regulators. But problem is it is never enforced or implemented. Many hospitals have breached those caps as well. So what you need is a broader healthcare reform to ensure that we reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure, push more people to rely on public healthcare institutions, right? For that, you need to improve the quality of healthcare in the public sector. You need to bring out more doctors, better doctors. You need to ensure that the right diagnostic tools, the right facilities, the right infrastructure is available in government facilities. Ensure that secondary, tertiary healthcare becomes more accessible and affordable. Right now, most of the large private hospitals are concentrated in all the big cities and towns. What about the rural areas, the remote areas, where private healthcare is not even accessible? Forget affordability, it's not even accessible. right? So if we really have to ensure that healthcare becomes affordable, it requires wider set of reforms focused on both public and private healthcare institutions. If regulation was the solution, then medical devices, for example, their prices would have already been regulated. Recently, the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, which regulates the prices of essential pharmaceutical products, it brought out a price cap on the prices of stents. It was brought out in 2017, but trust me, even today, it has not been implemented properly. Even today, there are institutions, hospitals, which are pricing the stent cost higher than what the regulator has set, because there is no enforcement. Implementation is lacking. So that alone can't be a solution. You need a wider set of reforms. Of course, government should regulate the private hospitals, the way they are pricing treatments and surgeries, by using the powers it has under Clinical Establishments Act. Apart from that, you need a wider set of reforms in public healthcare, and even private healthcare should be made to act according to market forces. Depending on the demand supply, pricing should also be determined. It can't be a situation where hospitals can charge whatever they feel like. Because there have been reports, there have been instances where for regular treatments procedures, some hospitals, the so-called elite hospitals, would have charged many times higher than what is the market rate. So this is something that should be curbed. Through the Clinical Establishment Act, such blatant shoot up in prices should be regulated. But other than that, improving the overall healthcare sector, especially by focusing on public healthcare, is a long-term solution. So that is exactly what the article is talking about. The article also says that the government should bring out these STGs, Standard Treatment Guidelines. There should be very strict standard treatment guidelines. Now, for example, let's say you go to get a surgery done, right? Let's say you want to get a basic coronary surgery, right? And let's say there's an arterial block and you need to get the block removed. Now, this surgery might cost around 1 lakh rupees in one hospital. Same surgery in another hospital will say it is 2 lakh rupees. Another hospital will say the same surgery will cost you 2.5 lakh rupees. So why is the pricing different? Hospitals are saying that our line of treatment is different. We offer you better conditions. We provide you with better facilities. We have more advanced modern equipment, team of specialized doctors. So they try to justify the cost by saying that basically their treatment is more qualitative, more superior. So tomorrow, hospitals might charge you anything and say that we are offering you better care than others. That alone is not a justification for higher prices. There should be a standard line of treatment. For example, insurance companies, they insist on this. They don't go out dispersing insurance amount to all the hospitals, whatever they are claiming. They check whether they are following the standard treatment guideline. Right? There should be a minimum standard, right? What hospitals should be doing. Beyond that, nothing should be allowed. Let's say for a particular surgery, if it costs around, let's say 60 to 80,000 rupees. Within that price range, pricing a surgery is fine. But you can't say that you are giving something else better and you can't charge, let's say 2 lakh rupees for the same surgery, which could have been done in, let's say 60, 80,000 rupees. So private insurance companies, which have a direct interest here, they are enforcing the standard treatment guidelines on hospitals. Government also is trying to do that under the Ayushman Bharat initiative, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Right? Even the government is trying to standardize the treatment guidelines and ensure that almost every hospital in the country, be it public or private, they should follow the same standardized treatment protocols. They can't simply claim that we have done this, we have done that, and increase the prices later. So that is one effective way as well to keep these hospitals under check. But broadly, if you have to make healthcare affordable, you can't do that just through price regulation. Yes, price regulation is needed, it is necessary. It has to be enforced and strictly implemented. Correct. But that alone will not help. You need broader healthcare reforms with focus on public healthcare. So that is what we learn from this important column. So I feel all three articles were very important. Don't think that these are from very dry or static areas. It's not very interesting or relevant. Trust me, you can get questions on this. UPSC has asked questions on healthcare sector, on environmental issues. You do get direct questions from such topics. Now let's look at the prelims section where we have 4 small articles, and after that we can wrap up the session. On page number 5, the Hindu carries this image of a houseboat which was stranded in the Vembanad lake in Kerala. Many of you might have heard about the Vembanad lake in Kerala. Some of you might have visited the location as well, right? Near Kochi, near the Alappuzha region. You have these beautiful backwaters in Kerala known for these houseboats. It's a very popular tourist location as well. So from environment, ecology and geography point of view, this ecosystem is very, very crucial. It's a very critical habitat as well. So let's see, where is Vembanad Lake located and what are the important facts related to Vembanad Lake. There can be a prelims question here. So first, it is located in Kerala near Kochi, all right, and it is fed by 4 major rivers. These are west flowing rivers: Meenachil, Achankovil, Pampa and Manimala. These 4 rivers, right, which are west flowing rivers here, they feed the Vembanad Lake. And by the way, it is the largest lake in Kerala and the longest lake in India. If you look at the map here, you can see how long the Vembanad Lake is stretching along the west coast of India towards the Arabian Sea. In fact, it is separated from the mainland, and there is a small island here which further separates it with the Arabian Sea. So that is what creates the backwaters here and makes it a popular tourist destination, a destination for houseboat tourism. So this is recognized as a wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. It's one of the Ramsar sites in India, which means it is an important habitat for birds, especially migratory bird species. So it is an important bird area as recognized by BirdLife International. BirdLife International is a global NGO that works in the field of bird conservation, especially migratory bird conservation. So it has recognized this wetland as an important bird area. It's a wetland of international importance under Ramsar Convention, and it is the location of the popular Nehru Trophy boat race, or also called the snake race, which is very popular in Kerala, right? So it has cultural significance as well. So please know about its location and its important features. There can be a direct prelims question based on this. Next, we'll look at this article from page number 12, which is again related to environment and ecology. The article is based on a study that was conducted by the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune. IITM, Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune, conducted a study regarding the sea temperatures across the Indian Ocean. According to this report, warming of the Indian Ocean is set to accelerate in the coming decades. It presents quite an alarming picture, and there are some important concepts brought out by this article as well. That's why I feel the article is important for your prelims. According to this scientific study, for the last 70 years, from 1950 to 2020, the temperature in the Indian Ocean saw an increase of 1.7 degrees Celsius. 1.2 degrees Celsius. As a result of global warming, right, climate change, the sea surface temperature of Indian Ocean has increased by 1.2 degrees Celsius over the last 7 decades. Now, the prediction by the institution is that for the next 80 years, by the end of the century, we might witness a further increase of 1.7 degrees Celsius. So cumulatively, in a time period of 150 years, the temperature increase of Indian Ocean would be 3.8 degrees Celsius. 1.2 degree increase from 1950 to 2020, and 1.7 degree increase from now till end of the century. So in 150 years, the temperature of Indian Ocean would have shot up by 3.8 degrees Celsius, which is more than enough to trigger irreversible changes in various natural phenomena. For example, cyclonic activity will increase multiple times if this is the rate of increase in temperature. As of now, on an average, 20 days of cyclonic activity is witnessed in the Indian Ocean. That is the average. Because I hope you know that for cyclone to take shape, there needs to be a low pressure depression. And for the low pressure depression to form, there should be a constant rate of evaporation. You need warm waters and the right temperature of an average of at least 27 degrees Celsius to provide for constant rate of evaporation, which feeds the cyclonic system. So warmer the sea waters, more will be the cyclonic activity. As of now in the Indian Ocean, on an average in a year, 20 days of cyclonic activity is witnessed. If the temperatures keep increasing like this, the study says that we might witness 220 to 250 days per year of cyclonic activity. It's almost a 10-time increase, more than 10-time increase, which essentially means we will witness more extreme weather events, more frequent cyclones throughout the year, and more intense cyclones. Next, this rise in temperature is more than enough to cause coral bleaching, to destroy important resources in the marine ecosystem. Sea grass could be destroyed. Kelp, which is a vital source of food for various species, could be completely destroyed, and this could disrupt the entire food chain in the marine ecosystem. The study also focused on the heat content of Indian Ocean. That is, how the heat is varying from the sea surface to the depth. As you go below, temperatures are supposed to drop. So the rate at which the temperature is dropping, this is increasing. Is that clear? Basically, in the previous years, when temperature was measured from the surface to a depth of 2000 meters, the rate at which heat content increased was 4.5 zeta joules. Now this is all set to increase further, and it would go up by almost 4 to 5 times in the coming decades to a rate of 16 to 22 zeta joules per decade. That is the decadal increase you will see. Essentially, it's not just the sea surface temperature, even at the depths of the Indian Ocean, temperature is going to increase considerably. The scientists have provided an illustration to help you understand the magnitude of the crisis. They are saying that this is the amount of heat which would be released by one Hiroshima atomic bomb detonation if it is done every day, if it is done every second for one entire decade. That is the amount of heat or energy essentially which would be essentially released into the seas and the oceans. So you're going to witness further rise in sea levels as well, because heating up of the water will cause thermal expansion, right? Plus the melting glaciers will bring more volume of water as well. So rising sea level is not the only threat, but extreme weather events, destruction of marine food cycles is a serious concern that we have to deal with in the coming years. Next, on page 14, there's a very, very important update. The G7 group of countries, they have agreed to stop all the coal-fired power plants by 2035. The energy ministers of G7 countries met recently, and the focus was on phasing out fossil fuel-based electricity. So G7 brings all the industrialized developed nations of the world, the Western countries essentially, right? So please find out which are these G7 countries. Mention that in the comments below. Who are the members of G7? Mention that in the comments. So these energy ministers who met, right, under the G7, they've agreed to phase out coal-fired power plants by the mid-2030s, essentially by 2035. So this is a big agreement. It's a historic agreement. The details are not still available, but the announcement has been made that these G7 countries will phase out all coal-fired power plants by 2035. Next, coming to the last article for today, on the second page of the Science and Tech supplement, which is provided in the online edition of the Hindu, there is a very important article related to China's lunar mission. China's lunar mission is called the Chang'e mission. If India has the Chandrayaan, China has Chang'e. So this is China's lunar mission. It has already sent multiple missions previously. For example, recently China even sent a lander rover which extracted few samples from the south pole of the moon and brought them back as well safely to the earth. So China is ahead of India when it comes to lunar exploration, right? So now it is all set for the next Chang'e mission, Chang'e 6, which is going to take off this week. So this week, China is launching Chang'e 6 mission, which aims to land at the far side of the moon, which has been the focus area for researchers, astronomers, and space agencies from many years. Even India's Chandrayaan mission primarily focuses on the far side of the moon, especially the south pole of the moon. Because the south pole is considered to host water crystals, which could be a viable water source in the future if we set up human habitations or human colonies on the lunar surface. That's why it's referred to as the Golden Belt. It's called the Golden Belt for lunar exploration. UPSC might ask you, what do you mean by Golden Belt for lunar exploration? It refers to the south pole of the moon, which is considered to have polar ice crystals. By the way, there is an Indian connection here, because Chandrayaan 1 mission of India, launched in 2008, it brought evidence for the first time to show the presence of water, to show the presence of polar water crystals in the south polar region of the moon. Right? So China is trying to build upon this further, because if there is a ready water source available, these polar ice crystals can be converted for drinking water, which can be used by future human habitations. Right now, there is a race, a global race, which has been triggered for lunar exploration, for landing on the moon, to send astronauts to the moon as well. On one hand, the US has accelerated its Artemis Accords, under which it's planning a manned mission to the moon by 2026. So within the next 2-3 years, we might see astronauts back on the moon, which is a separate initiative driven by US and its allies. Then there is China. China is planning few more uncrewed or unmanned missions, but by 2030, even China has a plan to land astronauts on the moon. China is collaborating with Russia here. NASA has already sounded a warning that if China reaches the South Pole first, it might very well declare the water resource as Chinese owned water resource. See, outer space is part of global commons. It does not belong to anyone. It doesn't belong to any country. It's a resource that belongs to humanity, right? It's treated as part of the global commons. But there is every possibility of geopolitics being played over this, and China might stake a claim for the water resource present in the south pole of the moon. So since manned missions are becoming a reality again, imagine by 2035, 2040, there could very well be a human habitation, a small human colony, where research and experiments are being conducted as part of the lunar exploration program. India might also very well land astronauts by maybe next 20 years. So US and Western countries are already sounding an alarm about how China and even Russia are going to stake their claims. So US has accelerated its lunar exploration program, essentially leading to a space race. And India is very much part of this, right? So understanding these basic concepts, why the south pole of the moon is important, why is it called the Golden Belt, and these upcoming missions can be very important. So on this note, I would like to end my discussion for today. Please take up these two practice questions for your answer writing practice. Write the answers without fail. This is the best way to practice answer writing, and post those answers in the comments so that it can help other students as well. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys understood everything, and if you did, please let me know in the comments and do press the like button. That is it for now. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.